Joining me is Newsweek senior editor-at-large Josh Hammer, along with the host of the nationally syndicated Tony Katz Today Show. Tony Katz, welcome, gentlemen.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Josh, the Harris campaign pushing back against the ad, targeting her supposed failures as border czar. She's trying to put the blame on Trump instead by saying he lobbied against Congress passing a bipartisan border security proposal earlier this year, but she didn't talk about how the Biden administration let all those millions of people in and could have stopped them at any point over the last 3.5 years. Your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the functional equivalent of blaming the firefighter and not the arsonist for the fighter, right? I mean, like it makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, like, what moral and logical universe do these people live in? And perhaps more to the point, what universe do they think that we live in? I mean, how stupid do they actually think that we are? I mean, we have been living through for the past few years the most unprecedented assault on American sovereignty in the entire history of this country. That border is wide freaking open. And yes, it's true that a few months ago, Joe Biden had this executive order on asylum where he's making sure that, or trying to make sure that you just go to a port of entry. Here's what they didn't tell you even about that executive order. One, if you are a UAC, an unaccompanied alien child between those ports of entry, you're still going to get into the country, period, full stop, amnesty, end of story. Second, even if you go to a port of entry, they're going to process you and let you in anyway. So it's all window dressing. They have a radical agenda. The media, Axios, Politico, all the corporate media outlets, they were calling Kamala Harris the border czar just a few years ago. They're now trying to sloppily retcon and physically rewrite history to pretend that she was not. She can't hide from her record. She cannot run from her record. The Trump campaign ought to expose it day in and day out.
Josh, I couldn't agree more. Meanwhile, as you can see, Kamala's hosting a rally down in that battleground state of Georgia. It's a state where she might need some help. A recent poll from Harris X and Forbes shows she's not doing all that well yet, with Trump leading by 3 percentage points in Georgia. Better than Biden was doing, but doesn't look like it's enough. That says a 2-point difference there. Tony, does Harris have a shot in Georgia?
The answer is nobody knows anything, because there's not a bit of polling that exists right now that has any value. You're talking about a honeymoon phase. You're talking about all this so-called renewed enthusiasm, and part of putting Kamala Harris on the ticket, engaging this maneuver to get Joe Biden out. I have a hard time telling the people who called it a coup that they're wrong, because I don't have a better word for them. This was about getting the down ballot races some excitement, getting people back out to vote because they weren't going to show up for Joe Biden at all. All of this honeymooning that you're seeing, that we've seen over the past week, is coming to a very, very quick end. After that, we can start taking a look at numbers and see what's what. But people will be reminded, just like they said in 2020 when Kamala Harris dropped out before a primary began, she's not popular. She's not likable. And when she goes off script, just grab the bourbon and the popcorn, because that word salad is a show.
Thank you for that, Tony. Josh, reports suggest that Kamala Harris might announce her VP pick as early as the next few days, probably next week. A few names have been floated. Any favorites out there? Is it going to matter? What is her biggest need for the ticket?
Well, her biggest need right now is to try to convince, meaning that she has to bamboozle, essentially, and deceitfully convince the American people that she is not as radical left-wing as she is, which, of course, militates in favor of a generic, typical, old, boring white guy. So, for that and many other reasons, my first initial prediction, as soon as I heard that Kamala Harris was successfully cooing Joe Biden out of this race, my very first guess was actually Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona. Arizona's a swing state. Mark Kelly is not really a particularly moderate guy. He votes with Liz Warren and Bernie Sanders the overwhelming majority of the time, but he has kind of the aesthetics, he has the rhetoric and the optics of looking like a moderate person. He's got that nice, rocket man astronaut story. His wife, Gabby Giffords, was shot 14 years ago or so. So that was my first guess. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, is certainly getting a lot of attention. Democrats are somewhat between a rock and a hard place when it comes to Josh Shapiro. He himself is a very liberal man, obviously. I mean, he ultimately is a partisan Democrat, but he is at least more centrist on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if nothing else. He's not conservative on that by any means, but he's at least a little bit more centrist. He's not with the Hamas wing in Dearborn, Michigan. So it'll be very interesting to see if they do go ahead and actually pick Josh Shapiro, just how much the far left of that party actually sits home. How they calculate that, is it actually worth it to try to win Pennsylvania? I don't know. I'm not a Democrat. I can't pretend to offer them anything remotely resembling candid advice. I would predict, though, it's probably going to be Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly, if I had to guess.
Interesting. Okay. Trump's vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, also out on the campaign trail, making his first appearance in Nevada since becoming the Republican Party's nominee. He is also expected to speak any moment now, and we'll bring you some of that if and when it happens. Tony, what are you hoping to hear from J.D. Vance, and what do you think about him as Trump's running mate?
First, to Josh's point, they're going to decide Shapiro's too Jewish, and you and I, being Jewish, are going to laugh out loud at that. And Mark Kelly, he owns a company that makes weather balloons that was invested in by China. I think you got to look at Tim Walz out of Minnesota, a guy who thinks that being a socialist is just being neighborly. What do I want to hear out of J.D. Vance? I want to hear policy that is directed at the people of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio. I want to hear him talk to blue-collar people about blue-collar issues. I want to hear very little about Kamala Harris, and I want to hear very much about what the next 4 years can look like. He needs to be a guy who talks about that future. He has that capability. He has that skill set. Nobody's going to be able to retail campaign in a way he can in those states, talking about those issues as he has, as his own history provides. There's no need to address Kamala Harris. There's no need to address who a potential vice presidential pick might be for her. Only talk about where Americans are with the economy, with the border, with war, with the war on drugs, and what fentanyl is doing to kids. That's your prescription for J.D. Vance going forward.
Tony Katz, Josh Hammer, you guys are terrific. I appreciate you joining me, and I'm going to watch both of your shows. I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Excellent.
Thank you.